All right, so hello everyone again. I'd like to officially welcome you to today's webinar, Managing Up, Navigating the VISTA Supervisor Relationship. I'm Calvin Landrum, a training coordinator here at AmeriCorps VISTA with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session, so you'll hear me there also. Also joining us are Jessica Knight and Indy Clark from our partners at Education Northwest, who have helped prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. So you'll probably see them in the chat and in the Q&A kind of giving you direction, posting links, and doing various other activities. So I'd like to take a second to welcome our main speaker today. Signa Bishop has been working in the training and development field in higher education, nonprofit, and national service settings for the last 10 years. She holds a master's degree in education and a certificate in intercultural training and development through Portland State University, before joining Oregon Health and Science University in 2013 to work on leadership development. Signa worked for several nonprofits, recruiting volunteers, engaging students in service, running college access programs, and managing AmeriCorps programs. Signa, you've done a whole lot. She also got her professional start as an AmeriCorps VISTA, so welcome, Signa.
All right, thanks, Calvin. Good morning, everyone. I am super excited to be here to discuss best practices for managing up, or in other words, how to communicate effectively in order to develop a strong and productive working relationship with your VISTA supervisor. As Calvin mentioned, I served as a VISTA myself and then went on to serve as a VISTA leader and VISTA program director, so I'm quite familiar with the many challenges that come up between VISTAs and their supervisors throughout the service year. I might not go so far as to say that I've heard it all, but I do certainly feel comfortable saying that I've heard a lot. Likewise, in my current position, I work with supervisors, so folks just like your VISTA supervisors, and I help them build their leadership and management skills. As such, I can provide some perspective on what your supervisor might be thinking or where they're coming from. Hopefully this will help you better understand the supervisor role in general, as well as what might be going on for them and what managing up strategies might be most effective with them. So this presentation is designed to help you identify methods for building successful professional relationships, to assist you to develop strategies to communicate your needs to your supervisor in a more clear and specific way, and identify VISTA resources to support you in the workplace challenges you may be experiencing. We'll also explore ways to address some of the common communication challenges that VISTAs face while navigating their service year. We'll provide some practical solutions for improving communication, and we'll bust some common myths about managing up. So I want to pause for just a moment before we dive into the content for this session, because I really want to hear from you all first. So my question is, what comes to mind when you hear the term managing up? Please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure that you send to all participants. We want your comments to be visible to everyone, so please be sure to enter them in the chat panel and not the Q&A further down the screen.
So we're going to wait for these responses to roll on in. Thank you, Daphne, for being considerate and not wanting everyone to hear you chewing. That's very considerate. Let's see, since it's from the bottom up, management, being on time and effective communication. Let's see, since it's open interaction, making sure your supervisor has a clear idea of what you do and what you need. I think that's a pretty good description. Signa, anything else standing out to you? Let's see. I got checks and balances.
Looks good to me. They're all pretty in line with what we're going to talk about, so I'm excited to see that folks are coming to this ready to learn and have some great ideas.
I like Natalie Berkman says, a play on words with manning up, taking initiative and communicating with your supervisor. That's kind of funny.
Cool. All right. So thanks for those responses. I want to spend the next few minutes discussing what I mean when I say managing up, as well as do some myth busting around the practice of managing up. So in their article, Managing Your Boss, Drs. Thomas Zuber and Erica James write that managing up is the process of consciously working with your boss to obtain the best possible results for you, your boss, and the organization. This is not political maneuvering or kissing up, Rather, it's a deliberate effort to bring understanding and cooperation to a relationship between individuals who may have different perspectives. In other words, managing up is not a bad thing, and really the heart of managing up is all about having great communication. It's also about advocating for yourself so that you can be happy, productive, and have awesome professional relationships. So let's dive deeper into some of the common myths surrounding managing up, and some of which came up in your chat comments. All right, myth number 1, managing up is telling my supervisor how to do their job. Not so. Managing up is all about communicating, like I said before. It's all about asking questions and clarifying expectations to foster a productive working relationship. It's also about creating a shared understanding of projects, timelines, direction, and vision, which ensures that you're able to meet your supervisor's expectations. Likewise, your relationship with your supervisor is about collaborating to maximize outcomes, which you can do better together. So really, managing up is about being easy to supervise. I think it's important to emphasize that the VISTA supervisor relationship, like any relationship, is a partnership. It's about doing your part to make sure you're aligned with your supervisor's expectations and the goals of the organization that you're serving with. Myth number 2, it's my supervisor's job to manage so that I don't have to. Believe it or not, very few supervisors have actually been taught how to manage and lead, and they really appreciate your help and guidance. Also, even though you may not manage other people at this moment, you are always in charge of yourself. Yes, you do have a supervisor, but a sense of personal leadership and initiative goes a long way and will help you be a better learner and worker. Personal leadership means that you help others work with you, you collaborate, and you communicate well so that others know how to help you succeed. Myth number 3, I could never manage my supervisor. Suspicions aside, the truth is that your supervisor cannot read your mind and they don't know everything. Seriously, the managers I work with regularly tell me that sometimes they feel like they don't know what they're doing in their leadership roles. Also, in my leadership training work, managers often tell me that managing is easier if the people they supervise actually communicate their needs and advocate for themselves. Believe it or not, managing people is hard, and managers struggle too. Some of the common challenges they experience include delegating, giving constructive feedback, focusing on the big picture, projecting confidence, and perhaps, surprisingly, getting support from above, or managing up, in other words. In fact, one of the topics I teach managers in my classes is how to manage up to their directors, department administrators, and vice presidents. It seems a bit crazy, but supervisors have the same questions and challenges about managing up that many of you do. And the bottom line is that you are smart. They selected you as a VISTA for this project because they had confidence in your abilities. They need you, and they are relying on you to help them help you be successful. So now that we've discussed a few managing up myths, let's talk about some of the real-life managing up challenges that you are currently experiencing or have struggled with during your VISTA year. So please respond to the chat question. What managing up challenges are you currently experiencing? Please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure to send to all participants.
And while we're waiting on them to roll in, I will call back to some of the ones we saw earlier, you know, with people saying, oh, my supervisor's really busy and kind of being in and out. Let's see, since it's consistently being proactive. Micromanagement, I saw that one earlier also. Let's see, it says it's hard. I have a hard time getting my supervisor to trust my expertise since I'm so young. Rachel, I feel that. That can be a challenge that really doesn't go away, even when you're not a VISTA sometimes. I get that on my end also, so I feel ya. Someone says confusing project objectives. We're going to touch on that, on how to, ask for clarification. Matching my work style with the expectations of others. I see a lot of being proactive and taking initiative, and it's hard to say. I'm not sure if you mean from your supervisor perspective or from your end? Like, is your supervisor having a hard time being proactive and taking the lead, or are you kind of feeling like it's a little tricky for me to do that? I'd be curious to know. Working with a busy schedule. I see a lot of things in here, Signa, that say people's supervisors are busy and they don't have the time to deal with them, which should never be the case. It's probably not the case.
I'm definitely seeing those themes too. Cool. I think a lot of the challenges we're going to talk about in the next section are really going to help with some of the things that have come up in the chat.
I think so too.
So thanks everyone for answering this chat question. I know it takes a little bit of maybe vulnerability and honesty, and so I appreciate that you were able to share. And again, I definitely see some themes that have come up. So I have a few common challenges that I'm planning to address based on what VISTAs have said in the past, and we'll also have the opportunity for Q&A to discuss any other challenges that have come up in the chat as well. All right. So let's get started. Okay, so you are intimidated by your supervisor, or you perceive them as grumpy, brash, or just plain scary. Now what? Start by checking on what assumptions you might be making about your supervisor. How you're perceiving them may not be the way they're intending to come across. One of my VISTAs once told me that she thought I was intimidating when we first met, and it actually blew my mind. I had no idea that other people might find me intimidating. So maybe your supervisor doesn't either, or maybe they just have a really direct communication style that makes them seem insensitive, or maybe they're just not a morning person. Our list of what-ifs could go on, but I'm just asking you to check in and see if your idea of them is accurate. Do other people see them this way is a great question to ask. Check your impression with your coworkers. Other folks who work with you are your allies and can be excellent interpreters regarding communication styles, supervisors, pet peeves, and just general office culture as well. Also, consider whether you're basing your opinion on one particularly memorable interaction with your supervisor. Did you catch them at the wrong time on a bad day? Say the wrong thing at the wrong moment? Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about other people and their intentions are not totally correct or complete when we start to question how we got to that conclusion. On a related note, knowing your supervisor's hot buttons means that you can avoid stepping in it unintentionally. For example, a former supervisor of mine really disliked complaining, and it took me a while to understand that what I felt like was therapeutic venting and self-expression really pushed her buttons. She felt like complaining wasn't productive and would rather spend energy focusing on what we could actually control and influence. Once I figured this out, our relationship significantly improved. This is a managing up challenge that a lot of managers in my classes struggle with as well. I regularly hear them say, "This is good advice, but how do I find out what my supervisor's hot buttons are?" My response is often, "Well, have you tried asking?" This strategy tends to make people pretty nervous, but it's really the easiest way to get the information you need. You might say something like, "What's your biggest pet peeve at work?" Or, "What advice do you have for me to avoid irritating you?" You should ask in a way that makes sense for your relationship with your supervisor, but I'm here to tell you that just asking isn't that big of a deal. The worst that can happen is that they don't know off the top of their head. They say they don't have any hot buttons, which, if they're human, is likely not true. Or they tell you that they prefer not to share this information. If you end up hitting a brick wall, again, you can always rely on your coworkers to help you figure this out, and really just being observant will probably get you most of the answers you need for overcoming this challenge. One other suggestion for dealing with an intimidating supervisor is to seek out feedback. This can be scary in and of itself, but it's a huge opportunity to better understand how your supervisor perceives you. Don't wait for an appraisal period to find out your supervisor's opinion of you and your work. If you get bad or constructive feedback, discuss your concerns, but do it on a mature level. Try not to emotionally or confrontationally address the situation. Really just try to understand the feedback you're getting and why. One-on-one meetings are also a great forum for requesting feedback and making this a regular part of these one-on-ones creates a space for feedback to become a regular component of your VISTA supervisor relationship. Also, if you're not getting feedback that is specific enough to act upon, ask questions to clarify, like, what would you like to see in the future? What specifically would you like me to change? How do you recommend I approach this differently next time? Then, be sure to listen to what your supervisor says and try to act on it. It is okay to ask for help as well. One of your supervisor's responsibilities is to help you remove barriers so that you can be successful. Finally, give feedback to your supervisor too. Let them know if you need something that they're not providing, and give them positive feedback and appreciation when they do something that's really helpful to you. Everyone needs feedback, even supervisors. Feedback is a great relationship building tool, and once you've gotten more comfortable with your supervisor, you just might be able to let them know that they can come across as scary sometimes. So I definitely heard this come up in the chat. Your supervisor is so busy that they don't have time for you. This is a big one that I used to hear from VISTAs and that I know is still a common challenge. This is also a challenge that's really experienced by almost everybody who has a supervisor. And whether it's because they have a big job, maybe they're part-time, they may be covering for other staff, or all of the above, supervisors are sometimes some of the busiest people around. And the bottom line is that managing by meeting and communicating with the people they lead is a supervisor's job, so they really should be doing this. However, there are only 24 hours in a day, so how do you make this work considering that we're all strapped for time and resources? It's definitely a balancing act. First, I suggest that you actually need to ask for a meeting if you're not already having one. And don't take no for an answer. This might sound a little risky, but I'm serious, and the risk is worth the reward. Your supervisor should make time for you, and you might be able to help them make time to fit you in. So here's how I suggest you go about doing this. First, strategize and prioritize. Make sure you're spending your precious time with your supervisor on your top priorities. Also, you should take charge of the meetings, bring an agenda, and start with your agenda items. Also, make sure to solicit clear expectations and priorities. Most supervisors don't spell out their expectations, and the burden of discovery falls on those below them. Don't wait for your supervisor to provide you with this information. Instead, initiate a series of informal discussions on our objectives, helping your supervisor clarify and communicate his or her ideas. Make sure you communicate your own ideas as well. Next, I suggest that you provide adequate information. Information is power, and a poorly informed supervisor cannot advocate for your needs or make the best decisions for your project or for the organization. I also recommend coming to your supervisor with solutions and not problems. You may not know all the answers, and that's totally fine, but coming with a few solutions to a challenge you're facing will show them that you've at least thought through the problem, and they'll likely be more willing to help you brainstorm additional options and help you implement the solution. Also, be sure to relay good and bad news, and don't surprise your supervisor. Remember that your supervisor has a supervisor too, and that they are responsible to that person. As a manager, it doesn't always feel good to have your boss tell you about a mistake, or sometimes even good news about your team if that's the first time that you've heard about it. It makes managers feel disconnected and vulnerable. So don't put your supervisor in that situation. Make sure they know about everything that's happening with your project, good and maybe not so good. Another great tip is to match your communication method to their preference. Do they prefer email, Skype, in-person, texting, walking meetings in between other meetings? Varying your communication method can be a great way to snag time with your supervisor if they can't sit down with you for 30 minutes at a time. If you need to talk to them, send them an informational email in the morning, and then walk them to an afternoon meeting to get the information you need. Finally, follow up after you've had a conversation to check for understanding and make sure that you document who's doing what so that everyone is accountable. Clear communication is also just a great way to build trust with your supervisor. If you communicate well, they know that they know what they can expect from you, and they know that you are making every attempt to make sure they have all the information they need to be successful themselves. A great tool for facilitating communication is the one-on-one meeting. We'll discuss one-on-one best practices in a bit, but if you're already having formal one-on-ones with your supervisor, if you're not already, I highly recommend asking for this time with them. It's a great opportunity to update your supervisor on your project, learn about their agenda, and build your relationship. Another common managing up challenge is when supervisors take the no news is good news approach, which means that they only communicate if there's a problem. If this is you, you are not alone. And unfortunately, this is a popular but less than effective management technique. Mostly this happens because supervisors are really busy, or because they try to avoid giving constructive feedback because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings, or because they're trying to avoid micromanaging and they've swung to the other side of the spectrum to totally hands-off. Or it could be because you're awesome and they feel like you don't need a lot of coaching. Regardless of the reason, at best this method is exasperating, and at worst it can create a culture where we all walk around on eggshells trying not to attract the supervisor's attention because it means we're in some sort of trouble. However, don't despair. You can counter this tactic by being visible, by asking a lot of questions, and by working to build a professional relationship with your supervisor. Many of the strategies that work for a busy boss work with the no news is good news supervisor too. These include catching their attention during in-between times, grabbing coffee before a meeting, or walking and talking on the way, using the time on a car trip as a relationship building opportunity, or snagging a few minutes of their time after an all-staff meeting. By taking advantage of these in-between moments, you can actually get a lot of the information you need to get your work done. Also, make sure to use these few moments strategically by prioritizing the questions you have and by asking for feedback on specific issues. This time may be precious, so make sure you're getting exactly what you need from it. Finally, asking your supervisor about themselves and their job can help draw them out so that they'll be more forthcoming with both positive and constructive feedback. This is a good relationship building tool for almost any situation, and people generally like to talk about themselves, so use this to your advantage. People are much more likely to help those with whom they have a relationship and who they feel genuinely care about them. While you're at it, tell your supervisor a little bit about yourself too. Help! I have 12 supervisors. This is one of the other issues we hear from VISTAs a lot. Okay, so maybe it's not 12, but more than one, which can sometimes feel like too many, and this can really be a challenge. Even if you have two awesome supervisors, expectations may collide or mismatch. They may not be communicating with each other, or they may both think that they're your #1 supervisor and their assignment should take priority. So, what can you do to work within this situation? Well, I recommend frequent communication and documentation and follow-up to make sure everyone is on the same page. This might look like copying all your supervisors on informational or project-specific emails, keeping great meeting notes and perhaps storing them electronically where everyone can access them, or maybe emailing notes out to all your supervisors. Also, you can always ask them to talk to each other. It's totally okay to discuss the concerns you have about feeling pulled in different directions or about having conflicting priorities. If this is the case, it's likely your supervisors just don't realize this is happening, and hopefully they'll take steps together to figure it out. Also, the positive spin on this is that now you have more mentors, a larger network, and several potentially excellent references. So it's possible that having more than one supervisor will turn out to be a great opportunity, especially as you finish out your VISTA year and are looking forward to what's next. The no boundaries supervisor. This was one of the challenges that we heard about in the last webinar we conducted on this topic, and to be honest, it is one of the hardest to manage because it can feel so uncomfortable. But we've all been there, and we've all had a supervisor, colleague, acquaintance, or maybe even a friend that shared something with us that felt like a boundary violation. Maybe we've even done it ourselves. To err is human, and so is the overshare. However, if you've got a supervisor who is regularly sharing too much about their personal life, their politics, or their religious views, it can get awkward fast. In fact, I think this is one of the fastest ways for supervisors to lose trust and create a destructive or toxic work environment. Typically, though, there is hope for helping someone recognize the impact of this behavior. For these kinds of tricky situations, I find it's helpful to have a formula to follow for providing meaningful feedback. There are a lot of variations out there, but I recommend the COIN conversation model. So let's talk through this a little bit. First, make a connection by pointing out that you care about them, which is why you need to address this issue. Do this in the moment if possible. This way you can provide your observation about the specific factual examples of exactly what was said or done that's making you cringe. Then, describe how their behavior is impacting you. Finally, suggest or ask for their ideas on what could be done differently in the future. For example, you might say, I care about your happiness and I'm glad that you feel that you can trust me. However, when you tell me about your Tinder profile, it makes me uncomfortable and I feel like it interferes with our professional relationship. I want to get to know you, but that's a little too personal. I would love to hear more about your kids or your hobbies. How about we start there? So be direct, be specific, and be clear about what behavior should stop, and use what you already know about them to show that you care and to suggest other more appropriate topics. Many times people overshare because they're trying to relate to others, trying to be accessible and appear more human. They may even be trying to seem cool. Unfortunately, this kind of behavior often backfires, especially when it's a supervisor. However, it's likely that this person just doesn't know how they're coming across, and having someone point it out in the moment will be enough to shine a light on how their behavior is impacting other people around them. With any luck, you will come across as professional and kind, and they will be suitably horrified and apologetic. For more serious situations, like supervisors who treat the office like a free therapy session or a bully pulpit for their political or religious views, you may have to employ more serious tactics. If you've addressed this issue directly and your supervisor continues to violate reasonable boundaries, I would encourage you to discuss the issue with a senior leader at your organization. Now, be careful. This may be a nuclear option because you generally want to avoid skipping links in the chain of command. But if you're on the receiving end of a constant overshare and you need this behavior to stop, a conversation with a senior leader may be just the right intervention. We'll also discuss other resources like your VISTA leader and CNCS staff members a little bit later, which also may be helpful to you if you need to talk through your options to determine the best course of action in a situation like this. Okay, so now we're going to transition from managing up challenges and talk about a specific intervention that I've already mentioned during this presentation, which is the one-on-one meeting. And in my opinion, this is one of the best options for building a productive VISTA supervisor relationship. But before we jump in to talking about best practices about this tool, which I love, I want to get a sense of how many of you are currently having one-on-one meetings with your supervisor. So please answer the poll questions on the right side of your screen, and we will take a second to let you think through these.
I love a one-on-one meeting. Honestly, they're my favorite things. I know from my job, while we're waiting on everyone to weigh in, for my position, I know, I don't typically have like a formal every week one-on-one meeting, but my boss is like right behind me, and we have a pretty like open door policy. So maybe that's what you have at your organization. If that works for you, even better. But let's see, our poll just closed. And let's see, what do we have? Always takes a second to calculate. I hope no one's answering E. What's a one-on-one meeting? I might be a little disheartened by that. Oh, there we go. All right, Signa, I think you can see this too. We've got, thank God no one answered E, but we've got a lot of people that said yes, so I think we're off to a really good start.
Yeah, totally. This is awesome. I'm really excited to see that, and I'm super glad that folks are having at least some one-on-ones with their leader, and we'll talk about a process for this that I recommend. So even if you're currently having one-on-ones, I think this will be helpful. This will definitely be helpful to think about how you might structure that conversation.
Yeah.
So first, I want to acknowledge that I know all of you are supposed to be having one-on-one meetings with your supervisor and that this is a requirement of VISTA. However, I also want to acknowledge that what we're supposed to do isn't what we always do. It isn't always possible, and sometimes it isn't the best thing to do. So being required doesn't mean that it's realistic or relevant. So for those of you that said, I rarely meet with my supervisor or we meet but not regularly, that is common, and you're not alone, and I want to just acknowledge that. So however, this doesn't mean that your supervisor is off the hook for meeting with you. Life gets in the way of our best intentions sometimes, but they still need to fulfill this requirement. So that being said, let's spend a moment talking about one-on-ones because I think it's one of your best resources for getting the attention you need from your supervisor. It's something you can ask for, it's easy to set up, and it's easy for you to lead without asking too much from them. So best practices for ensuring successful one-on-one meetings are as follows. One-on-one meetings should be held weekly or as often as possible for 30 minutes. They should be scheduled at a regular, consistent time and are rarely missed. In addition, the primary focus for the one-on-one meeting is on you, the VISTA, and you should always make sure to take great notes and follow up on action items. I want to be sure to mention that the tool that's linked on this slide is geared towards managers, meaning that's intended for supervisors to use during a one-on-one meeting with their employees. However, the one-on-one meeting approach is easily transformed or turned around so that it can be used by the person being managed during a one-on-one. In fact, my supervisor and I both use this tool and bring our own copies to our one-on-one. Okay, so let's dive into the actual one-on-one meeting approach, which describes how the time during this meeting should be spent. The premise of the one-on-one meeting is called the 10-10-10 approach. This means that a 30-minute meeting is broken out into 3 10-minute sections. The first 10-minute block is for you, the VISTA, and you are responsible for leading this part of the meeting. This means that you bring the agenda items and you go first. This ensures that you get the time you need for your questions and have the space to inform your supervisor about successes as well as any barriers you're facing. The second 10-minute block is for your supervisor's agenda items. One of the secrets of this model is that you going first during the first 10 minutes ensures that your supervisor won't monopolize the entire meeting with their stuff. However, because you went first, it's very likely that they've already checked off some of the things on their list because you've already addressed them. So they should also get what they need during their 10 minutes. The final 10 minutes are for your career development, personal and professional goal setting, and any other growth opportunities. This is set aside as an intentional part of the approach so that there's always time for these conversations. This may be where you talk about mentorship, take a look at your resume, get connections from your supervisor for informational interviews, work on a stretch goal, etc. As such, hopefully this becomes a regular part of your VISTA supervisor interactions and is an ongoing discussion throughout the year. This is also a great opportunity to continue to develop and strengthen your relationship with your supervisor. In addition to the one-on-one tool, the Manager Tools website also has several amazing podcasts that are helpful if you're looking for more information on how to conduct and get the most out of one-on-one meetings. The link to the website where you can find an editable one-on-one meeting document and the podcast is included in the resources section of this presentation. So if one-on-one meetings are at heart about relationship building, let's discuss some of the questions you can use to engage your supervisor in the one-on-one conversation. Here are a few relationship building and expectation setting questions that may help you think about what kinds of questions you'd like to ask your supervisor. What's your preferred mode of communication? This ties back to several of our common challenges, and getting this information up front can go a long way toward making sure you're communicating well, as well as getting what you need from your supervisor. What are your expectations for this project? Try to get specifics by asking about timelines, deadlines, project partners, and what you should do if you run into a problem. What can I handle on my own, and what needs your approval? This is a very powerful question, and it's great to know because it can be a huge time saver for you in moving your project along. This is also a great clarifying question about span of control and authority. How often would you like status updates on this project? Ask this and then provide status updates on schedule. This will help you build credibility with your supervisor. And if they say they don't really need status updates, take the initiative and provide them anyway. What are your top priorities for this project? This question shows that you care about alignment and that you're interested in helping your supervisor meet their goals, in addition to your own. Understanding your supervisor's agenda also means that you can align your tasks and project with that agenda in order to forward both your goals. It also means that your supervisor is more likely to advocate for you and will see you as a trusted ally. We know that a year of service as a VISTA is not without its challenges, and we want to encourage you to tap into your resources for support. Calvin and I are going to spend the next few minutes discussing some of the resources available to you at your site, your VISTA program, and at the Corporation for National and Community Service.
Yeah. So I guess you take it away. I guess you're here.
Sure. So I'll take the first part, and then Calvin will talk a lot about the details around the VISTA side of the house, which will be awesome. Okay, so let's talk about what to do if you have a really tough supervisor situation. First, I want to give a shout out to the support offered by other VISTAs at your site or on your team. My fellow VISTAs during my 2 service years were a great source of support and camaraderie. I encourage you to ask your fellow service members what's working well for them and tap into the resources of your peers all over the country through the VISTA campus forums. Likewise, your coworkers can be an amazing source of support and assistance. They have a history at the project, and they can give you firsthand account of what it's like to work at the organization, as well as give you tips on how to succeed and thrive there. A few coffee dates with coworkers can go a long way toward making your service year awesome. Furthermore, your supervisor's supervisor may also be a resource and source of support for you. This can be tricky because, like I mentioned earlier, if you typically want to avoid going over your supervisor's head when issues arise, you typically do want to avoid doing that. But if you really need help and you feel like you've hit a wall with all of the other resources at your site, you can certainly reach out to a higher level in the organization to see if they have advice for you. Finally, I want to acknowledge that bad bosses are a fact of life. They exist in almost every organization, and there is a mountain of research and literature devoted to analyzing and understanding them. And there are people like me whose jobs revolve around preventing, diagnosing, and curing bad bosses. And yet, they persist. So what can you do about it? You can learn from them, and you can vow not to be like them. Some of our best learning opportunities come from failure, even when it's someone else who's failing. So take this opportunity to study up on what a bad boss looks like and sounds like, and don't be like that. I've had some terrible bosses who taught me to be a great employee. My scary bosses made me more empathetic. My busy bosses made me resourceful. My bad communicator bosses made me articulate. My 1 million bosses made me organized. And my no boundary bosses made me shrewd. My point is, they all made me better. It was super hard, but I learned a lot, and I wouldn't be where I am today without them. So seize the bad boss opportunity and learn what you can from them. It won't last forever. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Calvin now to discuss some of the ways that VISTA and CNCS can be helpful to you for those extra tough situations. And to sum up what we've covered so far. Calvin?
Thank you. Now is my time to jump in, not earlier. Apologize. Do I cut you off? So there may be times when a situation with your supervisor is maybe too challenging for you to manage on your own. For example, if your supervisor is like straight up mean to you or harasses you, or if your supervisor goes missing and you don't know when you're going to see them again, or if you really do have too many supervisors that you can't get any decisions made on your project. If you have any of these challenges or any other situations that are preventing you from, having a successful VISTA experience, I want to make sure to point you to some of the VISTA and CNCS resources that are available to you. So VISTA as a whole, the VISTA headquarters, is here to help you if you have a situation that's too challenging. And just realize that your supervisor is not your only form of support. That is not where the end is. That is not the end of the line. For those of you who have a VISTA leader, that is an excellent resource for you to go to. Those people have either served a year of VISTA or have done some other sort of national service, and typically have had to work with a supervisor and have had to manage up, so they can hopefully be a resource for you. If they are not, if you don't have a VISTA leader, you also have the state office at your disposal. Now, if you're not familiar with your state office, their role essentially is to manage your projects. They're in touch with your supervisors, they train your supervisors, they're the ones sort of administering your project. So they have a lot of sort of say in what goes on in your project. There is a very, very easy way to get in touch with your state office should you need to. It's really just your state abbreviation at cns.gov. So if you're in Texas, it's going to be tx@cns.gov. If you're in Florida, that's going to be fl@cns.gov. It's pretty easy, super easy to remember. If you send an email to that email address, it goes to everyone in your state office. So if you, have tried the strategies that we're talking about on this presentation, you've gone to your supervisor and said, hey, very directly, these are the issues that I'm having. Can you help me work on this? You've tried that, still not getting done. You find that you are not doing the work that you're supposed to be doing in your VAD, and you've said, hey, I don't think this really aligns with my VAD. Can we get me back on track? I'd really like to be focusing on this. If that's not helping, those are times when you can ask your supervisor, or ask your state office for support. You can say, hey, I really feel like I'm, not doing the objectives in my VAD. Can you please help me kind of get back to that? And again, you can go to them, with any sort of issues dealing with the overall management of your project. So now, what do we do with all of our shiny new managing up knowledge? So here are some ideas for next steps. Number one, I would take the time to write down a few questions that you feel are most important in establishing a great working relationship with your supervisor. And for each person, these may be different. Some people identified that they have more than one supervisor. So maybe your questions are, I need to know exactly who do I need to report to, who's in charge of what, who do I go to for certain things. Maybe you never see your supervisor, so your questions are, I need to, can we have a set one-on-one time, what is the best time to get in touch with you? How do you prefer to be communicated with so that I can make sure I'm getting what I need, and things like that. Relationship building questions that we reviewed earlier during the presentation may be helpful to you, but you can also craft your own. Next, ask for and set up a one-on-one meeting with your supervisor to discuss the questions that you created. Don't take no for an answer because they kind of owe that to you. They owe you some face-to-face time to give you that direction and to just let you know where you're going. No one likes to be anxious at work or anxious about the work that they're doing. So say, hey, we need to meet. This is very important and necessary. And along with asking for it, schedule it and make it recurring so you can keep yourself on track and you can discuss those issues. I also encourage you to try out the COIN conversation model with someone you trust. New tools can be a little clunky at first, so test drive this one before using it in real life. I know I did a lot of practice on I statements when I first learned about them, and now I'm a pro. You know, I practice with some friends, practice in a joking way, but whenever I actually have to use I statements, very good at it, less nervous. And again, that just makes you way more confident, so you can go into that one-on-one meeting and say, yo, we need to discuss this, and this. Finally, research managing up strategies to find what works for you. The advice that we provided here is pretty applicable to a variety of situations, but you'll still want to make these strategies your own, and make sure that they work out for you and what's going to work for your communication style in your particular situation. However, you know, I do encourage you to try something new and push yourself out of your comfort zone a little. And the rewards for your efforts really may surprise you. Maybe you'll find as soon as you have that conversation, an entire world opens up with your supervisor. Maybe they're just like waiting for you to kind of pull the trigger and sort of make that move. And once you do, you're like, oh, okay, that was actually very easy, and now I'm able to get what I need. And to help you out with the research piece, we are going to link you to some resources. And they are on the next page, so here you go. These are those resources that inform this presentation. This is where we got a lot of our information. If you can, take a screenshot of this page. You can write them down. We'll leave it up for just a little bit. And yeah, really capture these. They're going to also be included in the PDF of this presentation that's going to be on the VISTA campus. So you'll be able to find these there also. Let's see. All right, so we'll leave these up. We'll come back to them at the end. We can put them back up at the end. But now that you've learned some tips and tricks and tools for managing up, I want to know, what are your next steps? What's one thing from today's presentation that you want to put into practice? Put your ideas in the chat box, and let's see what we got. Can you get the links in this chat? Oh, I can probably do that actually. That's a very good suggestion. Here you go. Copy those over for you. All right, there you go. I posted the links in the chat, so now you have those. You can copy and paste them to wherever you need them. Let's see. So we got a lot of people saying the 10-10-10 approach. That's a good one. I really like that one. I know someone mentioned in here, you know, that that their supervisor kind of flies off the rails and starts talking about whatever they want to talk about. Conversation goes haywire. I think the 10-10-10 approach is really good for keeping those conversations on track, and it's just a really good meeting model. It's quick. It's like to the point. It doesn't leave a lot of room for a straight conversation, which is like what you want when you're having a meeting. You're trying to like get to the point, accomplish some objectives. So yeah, I like that one. Let's see. The relationship building questions. Thank you, Signa, for those. Those are great. Thanks for putting those in there. Let's see. We got a lot of 10-10-10. Everyone loves the 10-10-10. Since it's creating communication templates.
Seeing a little bit of the coin conversation come up too, which is cool to see. Wanted to offer a tool to have folks take away, and so I'm glad to see that that's a little bit of a helpful resource for folks.
Totally. Let's see. Someone says they think they like the 10-10-10 approach maybe more than they like the coin approach. Let's see. Signa, can you tell us about coin again, just briefly?
I can, and I am looking back to make sure that I get it right. 22, thank you. Alrighty, so COIN stands for connection, observation, impact on you, and next steps. And those are the chunks of what the conversation should look like, so that it just gives you kind of pointers on what should be included in order to provide the most actionable feedback and to really engage in a conversation.
Yeah. Someone else on here said something that something from today's presentation that they want to put into practice. You know, they said that it's okay to ask questions, and honestly, I think for me, that's the most important thing I think that comes from this presentation is that you're allowed to ask questions, and it's never annoying. I mean, you know, that is, as long as, I think there's a point, someone asked in the Q&A, John Mendez, I'll go ahead and answer your question here. He said, and I invite you, Signa, also to add to anything that I might miss, but John's question is, where is the line between being a good communicator, asking questions, and being annoying? And I'll say, like, I think straight up, if you come to me asking questions about things that you could have researched, then I may be annoyed. But if you've done your research and you've done your homework and you're coming with questions to kind of help you fill in those blanks and your own knowledge, I think that's where you become a good communicator, because I've done my research, I've done my work, now I need help connecting these dots because maybe you, supervisor, know things that I don't know, you are privy to more information. I think that is like where being a good communicator and sort of like towing that line between being like annoying and a good communicator come in. Signa, what do you think? Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
I totally do, and actually the Art of Managing Up that's linked in the resources page has a section on communicating, and it recommends over communicating actually. To say, you know, more information is better than less, and one piece of that I think would be ask for feedback. Your supervisor will tell you to shut up eventually, or they'll tell you that, hey, I don't need quite that much information, I appreciate it, but you know, I empower you to be independent. But really it's about making sure that they have the information that they need to be successful, as well as I think there are some other tips in the Art of Managing Up around bringing solutions, not problems, that will help that communication be really to the point and helpful, and really help you get what you need from your supervisor in terms of managing up and for helping your project be successful. So I highly recommend that article.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to, this is a really good time to segue into our Q&A for this webinar. But first, what you're going to see pop up is our evaluation, and we really want to know what you thought. So as we're going through the Q&A, if you wouldn't mind just taking a second to fill out our quick poll. Your responses help us. We read through them every single time and look for all your comments and try to find ways to improve our presentations and webinars to make sure that they are relevant and that we're giving you the information that you need. So that's going to be up for the remainder of the presentation as we're going through Q&A. So if you don't mind, take a second and fill that out for us. We really, really, really appreciate it. So we've given you a lot to think about, and now it's time for your questions. We've received a few in the Q&A, but just a reminder, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box because they get lost in the chat and it gets really hard to like queue them up and make sure that we're capturing everything. So make sure that you're putting questions in the Q&A box. I'm also going to ask our operator, Karen, to let us know how to ask questions via phone.
Thank you. At this time, if you'd like to ask a question over the phone lines, please press star, then 1, and record your first and last name clearly when prompted. Again, if you'd like to ask your question verbally over the phones, please press star, then 1 at this time.
All right, thank you so much. So while we're waiting on those questions, we'll check back in on the phone in just a second. Let's see, I've got one here from Shannon Ahlert. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. She says, my supervisor constantly interrupts my work by asking me to help her with her tasks, tells me about her schedule and plans, and then seems to hold it against me when I don't get my work done. How do I approach her about this?
That's a great question. I think it's another common VISTA challenge. And I think probably a coin conversation might help with that. So, you know, stating what you've observed and making that connection that, hey, I really appreciate that you share these things with me and I care about you and I'm glad to hear about your schedule and, you know, what you're up to. This is the impact on me, and it's, you know, I'm struggling to get my work done because I'm spending a lot of time talking to you, and that is great, and I want to make sure that I'm meeting your expectations. So what do you think we can do to help with that? And I would encourage you to make it your own, put your own words into it, but be direct, ask that question, she may not even realize that that's happening or how much time she's taking up. And so, be as specific as possible and address it with her.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's, that's where that empowerment comes in, of feeling like you have the backing to ask those questions. I mean, I don't know if there is a concern of like what might happen, if you have that conversation. But I think you just told us that you outlined what the problem was in your question. Now it's your turn to take that question, kind of, turn it around in a way that's going to be comfortable for you to deliver it, even if it's via email. If you feel like, oh, I'm pretty eloquent on email and I can vocalize this better that way. Some people are better writers than they are speakers, and that's how they can do it. I found for me sometimes it helps if I write something out and then I rehearse it to myself, so that when I do go to have the conversation, I'm able to enunciate, and I feel like I'm not having to think on the spot. I can actually concentrate on delivering the message and not so much the message itself. So that could be a strategy for you. But yeah, I mean, Jenny, you have the words for it. Now it's your turn to just kind of deliver that message. Let's see, who else do we have? Sarah says, can you please repeat myth number 1? I came in a bit late and have a training tomorrow where I'd like this information. So Sarah, myth number 1 was managing up is telling my boss how to do their job, which is not the case. Let's see, is this a signal? What are the kind of high point of, of that myth?
Thanks, Calvin. It's a good question, and it's basically about communicating is sort of the core and the heart of that one. Managing up is not about telling your supervisor how to do their job. It's about being a great communicator so that they know how to help you. And that's really kind of at the end of the day. If you take one thing away from this webinar, communicate, communicate, communicate is probably the number 1 tip. But it's really all about helping your supervisor understand what's important for you so that they can advocate for you.
Yeah, totally. That's up. Cool. So let's see. We have a question here from Jeffrey that I like. Oh, no, sorry, from Sarah King, who says, how can I delicately tell my supervisor that I don't feel challenged at work and am bored a lot of the time? I already asked if there's anything I can do to help since I have a lot of time in my hands, so she knows that I don't have much to do already. Sarah, I'd be curious to know what the response to you asking her that was. But, I think it's a place where you can come in and you can say, hey, I've completed all my work, my assignments. Are there any bigger projects, or are there any teams I can collaborate with? Maybe it's just you and your supervisor at your job, which can be a little trickier because, you're the only one there. But also, I feel like in a 2-person organization, there's got to be something else for you to do. Let's see, Signa, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I've actually totally done this before. So I went to my supervisor and in actually several cases have said, okay, I've worked on these projects and they're almost done, and here's where they're at, and I need more. I'm a highly productive employee and I need some extra stuff. He was luckily prepared to provide some opportunities and to say, well, here are 4 things that are on my wish list that you can help with. I would encourage you to think about what is interesting to you about the work that happens at the organization and come with some ideas too. And then it kind of becomes a brainstorm and you're not putting it all on them to say, well, what extra work do you have, and they're maybe feeling on the spot. So I would encourage you, bring some stuff, bring some ideas, bring some thoughts, and also that'll help direct it and make it hopefully so that you get extra stuff that is really interesting and exciting and that you're passionate about. But this is a really common thing. Sometimes supervisors just don't know what different individuals' capacity is, and different folks at different levels. So totally ask for it. It's likely they'll have some things on the wish list, but also bring some ideas of your own so that you can help direct that.
Yeah, you could, and you kind of took the words out of my mouth. That's also what I was thinking. Come with ideas of in an ideal world, in your ideal VISTA term at your project, what would you want to be doing? What would you want to be working on? Come with those ideas. Say, hey, I'd like to plan this event. I'd like to, kind of go out and do this assessment. I'd like to do this thing or this thing, and see what the response is on that. You know, as we mentioned earlier, you know, come with those solutions, not those problems. You know, saying I'm challenged and I'm bored a lot of the time, okay, cool, but what would you like for me to do about that? And I think that's where you come in and you can really guide your own service. And I think it's also important to think about in those times when you aren't feeling challenged or you're bored a lot of the time, what else can you be doing with that time? And I think those are valuable moments for your own professional development. You can, you know, find some learning online that you can do. You know, we have our VISTA classes. We've got maybe you can go take a class at a local community college, you know, something like that. Just see what else you can do to kind of like help you get ready for maybe your life after VISTA. All right, let's see. I'll go to Karen on the phone, see if we have anyone on the phone.
There are no questions at this time, but once again, as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question over the phone, please press star and then 1.
Right, thank you. Let's see. We have a question here from Jeffrey Carpenter. Let's see. He says, is it appropriate for me to go to the VISTA director or supervisor to review the reflection first, or do I send it to the VISTA director directly? Nervous about this. Oh, sorry, this is part 2 of a 2-part question. So the first part was, just reviewed my reflection of an out-of-state VISTA that is leaving next week. 14 pages long, and had a horrible experience with the other VISTA leader, whom he felt bullied him, and the VISTA director, who was never available or helpful. Is it appropriate for me to go to the VISTA director or supervisor to review first? Oh, Jeffrey, I'm having a little trouble figuring out what your role in this is. I can't tell if you're a VISTA or if you are a fellow supervisor or a VISTA leader, but it sounds like you have a review of a VISTA supervisor, and you're asking, should you take that review to their supervisor first or go directly to the supervisor who it is about? Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Like, any thoughts? Does that make sense, or do we need to try to repeat that?
I can take a stab at it. I think it may be a CNCS related question, just in terms of like CNCS process and what that might be, sort of what VISTA or CNCS might want someone to do with that. But you know, I would suggest, if possible, best practice is to go direct. And you might not have to bring that, you know, 14 pages to that person. Pick a theme or two that you're seeing and address that with that person and ask them for their perspective on that. I think those can be productive conversations. If you bring a laundry list, it's just they're going to disengage and they're not going to be able to digest all of that, and they're going to kind of think about, you know, where should I even start with this? But I'm not sure about sort of in terms of process where that should go to and if there is a specific sort of policy around that. So maybe Calvin, that's a question you could follow up with this person about.
Yeah, definitely. And Jeffrey, I see your note that where you said that you are a VISTA leader. Yeah, that's interesting. Jeffrey, I'll shoot you an email after this, and we can connect offline. All right. So let's see, what else do we have? Let's see. Kafildus Neal says, what do you do if they ask you to do things? Oh, what do you do if they ask you to do things and come up with ideas, but when you do, they turn your idea down and go on their own thoughts? So it sounds like you've been asked to come up with plans and ideas, but when you present those ideas, they are getting turned down and they're just going with whatever they're asking for. I'm trying to think of how I would deal with that. That's a good one.
I might suggest going back to the coin conversation, actually, and I think saying something like, I really appreciate that you ask for my feedback, and I enjoy having these brainstorm conversations. It seems like my ideas aren't considered, and here are maybe a couple of examples when that's happened. What do you think about that, and how can we, what do you need differently from me? I'm asking for some feedback about how I can be, more a part of this process, and I really want to help. where should we go from here? But I think stating what you've observed and giving a couple of specific examples can be really helpful, and also letting them know, like, I really want to be part of this process and I want to be helpful. How can I do that in a more effective way, and what do you need from me?
Totally, and I think the specificity is where you went in that conversation of saying, here are some examples of when I've come forth with ideas, that you've asked for, and that they haven't been, taken or even considered. Could you, maybe let me know if I'm going in a different direction? Maybe frame this for me better. Do I need to be going, sort of maybe just asking, what am I missing in this to make my ideas better and more valuable? Let's see. Matthew says, my supervisor tends to cancel or postpone my one-on-ones when they do occur. Oh, sorry. My supervisor tends to cancel or postpone my one-on-ones. When they do occur, they're rushed and important matters aren't discussed despite an agenda. What can I do to help this? So for the second part of that, of them being rushed and important matters aren't discussed despite an agenda, I think, again, our 10-10-10 method can help. But let's see, cancel. I mean, that's hard because that's something I haven't really had to deal with, and I think if I was in that situation of someone constantly canceling meetings or canceling one-on-ones, I would, that's where you've got to kind of put your foot down a little bit and say, no, like, we really need to have this meeting. I'm working on this, and I need some direction. This is one of the situations where, if this starts becoming a pattern, hey, you've canceled our last 3 meetings, and we have some really pressing issues. Can you please make time for me this week, to discuss those things?
I think that's a great suggestion, Calvin, and I think, being direct is probably the best way to go, and there may be some just, thinking about process too. Is this something that, are you bringing an agenda that the supervisor can see? Do you have the same things on your agenda? So do they know that there are things that are missing? Probably you are, but that may just be something that's getting overlooked, that it's like, well, I've got my agenda and the supervisor can't see it, and so they don't know when we run out of time, but we haven't discussed the 3 most critical things. This may also be an opportunity to kind of catch them in the hall or walk them to a meeting and pick the one thing that you want to talk to them about. And if you're walking with them to a meeting, they have to walk there, and so you may have the opportunity just to kind of go along with them, and you've got maybe a little bit of a captive audience. And I don't want that to sound evil or manipulative, but you're going with them, you're going to where they are, and you may have an opportunity to really capture their attention in a way that you haven't been able to before.
Totally, and I don't think it's manipulative. It's a strategy for getting what you need and accomplishing what your goals are. It's not even a malicious goal. You're just like, I need to get this thing done. This is how it's going to work out. Get in where you can. Let's see. We have another question from Brenda. Says, there's one unprofessional person in the office I'm serving in. She was on a personal call in her cubicle for half an hour. I spoke with the supervisor's assistants, and the supervisor heard me saying, we're all grown here, talk to her. I did. Not good. So Brenda, it sounds like you spoke with this coworker after receiving the advice to, go and approach them, and it did not go well. I don't really, I'm trying to think, I don't really know. If I knew the outcome, it'd be a little easier to have that conversation. But I find that being very subjective, being very objective about those sort of things really goes a long way. And talking to your coworkers and saying, hey, I don't mind if you have personal phone calls, but I'm trying to work. Would you mind, when you do have those, would you take it to an empty cube or just kind of step away because it is distracting when I'm trying to get things done? I think those conversations tend to go well as long as you're not making it personal and saying, hey, I don't really mind that you're doing this, but do it away from me so that I can get my work done. This is how this is affecting me.
You might also think a little bit creatively too, and just think about how you can take care of yourself. If you've got a noisy coworker, which many of us have had or do have, you might just want to think about bringing headphones and plugging those into your computer. And so, many of us work in cubes, and even if I'm doing, legitimate business work, I could be talking loud on the phone. And so we all have, in my space, which actually is a cube area, folks have headphones. They do some signposting when they're busy. So if I'm on a webinar or something, I'll put a little sign on my desk that just says busy in a webinar. But there are a lot of different ways I think that you can sort of protect yourself from stuff like that, so that it's not all on the other person to change, even though that's the best case scenario. It's also that you are able to do what you need to do in order to not be distracted and get what you need. Or maybe you can work in another space. You can sort of take your computer into another room. And I know that's, again, it's not an ideal situation, but we might need to just think a little bit creatively, because noisy offices and, coworker dynamics are just a reality of being in an office space.
Oh, yeah. I have a sign up right now, actually, being on this webinar. So, we all have to do it. So with that, I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A. I'll check back on the phone one more time. Karen, do you have any questions on the phone?
There are no questions on the phone at this time, but once again, as a reminder, please press star then 1 if you'd like to ask a question.
All right, cool. Thank you. I did see one more that just came in, and this is thank you, Jenna, for turning the conversation to a little more positive note. Jenna says, what are some ways you've appreciated your great boss in the past? And I think that's a great question, because when bosses do right by you, I think it is good to kind of let them know that. Sort of my way of doing that, is really just going in and having a really frank conversation with my supervisor, because I'm like a people person. I like to talk, and be face-to-face. So it's been me going in and saying, hey, I really appreciate all the things that you've done, and being very specific and letting them know that, like, it's not going unnoticed, that they are advocating for you or helping you or working on your behalf. You can, if you don't like the kind of face-to-face interaction, you can also send an email or just like write them a handwritten note. It goes a long way. Signa, what about you? What do you think? Appreciating good bosses.
Yeah, I have definitely offered my supervisor positive feedback, and I've just, said, I have some positive feedback for you. And I've tried to make it, specific and meaningful and timely, so doing it close to the time when it's happened if possible. I had a supervisor who really went above and beyond one time and advocated for me, and ended up getting me a resource that I needed in my position, and I sent a thank you card to his house, just because I wanted to make sure that he knew that I really, really, really appreciated what he had done, but I also wanted to make it personal. And that's not always a possibility, because you don't always know where your supervisor lives, but I wanted to make sure that he knew that it was really important to me and that I so appreciated the work that he did to advocate. And so that was one other thing that I had done. And he came back in the next day and he's like, I got your card. It made my day. So be sure all the time that you are offering positive feedback in addition to asking for what you need, because positive feedback is building up that bank with your supervisor and building that relationship, so that when you do need to have a difficult conversation or when you do need something from them, you've got this bank of goodwill that you've been building up all year. And I would say that that's true for kind of any professional relationship, but this one is really important for as well.
Totally, and I'd say think about the ways that you enjoy being appreciated and apply that to your supervisor. Don't do anything illegal, like I know there's a lot of time, there's like limits on like the amount that you can give a gift and things like that, but public recognition, like in a meeting or something, and say, hey, I'd like to, call out this person because they managed this project really well. Whenever I was struggling, they helped me in this way, so I want to say thank you for that. Those things go a long way also, and maybe to just give them like a little certificate, like print out something, just a little tchotchke, something fun that they can hang up, but just to let them know that you appreciate it. And with that being said, I think that is all the questions that we received. So what we're going to do is go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you all so much for attending this webinar. And we hope that you can join us for our next webinar, which is Starting Off Right, Professional Workplace Success. I know there's a lot of you out there who just began service not too long ago, so this may be a great webinar for you to attend. You can check out the webinars page under Connect and Learn on the VISTA campus to sign up for future webinars and to view all webinars that we've done in the past. There's a lot of great stuff in there, so go check those out. And we hope to see you again. Thanks, everyone.